Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Legalese So Now You Know series. Today, we've got quite an exciting topic. It's one which is on the lips of a lot of people in South Africa at the moment. And that is the topic of cannabis clubs. And today, we are not going into a theoretical overview or anything like that into the framework, although we will go into a little bit about that. Marlene and I, who I'll introduce in a minute, we've recently co-authored and published a manual with the name that's on your screen. It's a manual that's specifically designed, thanks Marlene, there it is, the hard copy, which I think we've included a link in the chat if you want to go through to the Legalese sites and purchase your own copy. The purpose of this webinar is to explain and describe this book and to launch it with Legalese and to start you potentially on your road as budding cannabis club, private cannabis club founders on your way to empowering you to build your own clubs. And so Marlene and I have published this manual, and we're here to kind of set out in very briefly what it's about and to field any questions about it if you'd like to hear or like to hear anything from us. So I'm Brett. I've worked with Legalese, and I have been doing so for almost 3 years now, for quite some time. Eitan, the director of Legalese, is an old friend, and we got together and thought about potentially what's happening in the cannabis space a long time ago after the 2018 decriminalization, the Prince privacy judgment, which we'll tell you a little bit about. And so we started practicing this cannabis legal thing together at Legalese. So I've been doing that since around that time. And yeah, it's been a great journey. And I've more recently been in touch, made contact with Marlene, my co-author and friend. And Marlene, maybe you'd like to just introduce yourself to the guys in attendance.
Thanks, Brett. So as Brett said, my name is Marlene. My company is called Cradlestone Quality Solutions. And I've done a whole bunch of things in the past. Mainly, I was a teacher and a quality management consultant. So recently, with all the developments in the cannabis industry, it became possible for me focus my attention full time on my business, which is really exciting. So what I do is I offer a quality management system consulting to legal cannabis farms, so the guys that are with the SAPRA licenses or the hemp permits. And then I also do this club thing. So the last 2 years I've been spending a lot of time researching the phenomena and figuring out ways in which we can incorporate it into our South African context, which is where along that journey I found Brett, and we just started sort of a professional relationship of like, let me keep you updated on what I find and vice versa. And we became friends, and then I started to decided to write this manual because everyone had always had the same questions posed about the whole construct of the private cannabis club. So I decided to write this manual, and I just couldn't do it without Brett, who gave me a lot of structure to function within and design this model together with him. And here we are today to tell you all about it and let you know what the purpose of the manual is and how we see it helping you. So that's all about me. Brett, if you'll go on for us to the next slide, then obviously today we're talking about the manual, as we've said just now. So the overview, a little bit of what we're going to discuss today. We're going to start with what is the purpose of the manual? What is it that we want to achieve with it? What is it that it was written for, to help you figure out what it is that you can do with this tool that we have for you. And then we're going to discuss a little bit, that's Brett's specialty, just the relevant legislation that we've used when we consulted on trying to figure out how these two proposed models that we ended up with, how they could function within legitimate and active legislation so that we can help people sort of stay out of trouble according to guidelines that are not legally acknowledged yet, and Brett will get into all of that, but we do believe that we've constructed some valid arguments to chat to. And then based on the legislative framework that Brett has helped me with, I've designed the private cannabis club management system. And this is basically, I'll explain obviously all about that, what the purpose of that is, but the purpose is to gather the proof that you are not dealing, and the system will help you function within the structure that we lay out for you in the manual. Then we're going to tell you how to use the manual, which is a really simple and easy process. And we're going to end off just before we have some questions. We'll also tell you where you can find the manual so that you can start your journey on moving forward with this. And yeah, like I said, at the end of the session, we'll have some opportunity for you to ask some questions of things that you may or may not understand or need some clarity on. And yeah, so I think let's kick it off, Brett. I'm going to hand back to you to start us off.
Okay, guys. So thanks, Em, for that overview and introduction. So as Marlene says, quite simply, the purpose of this manual is to educate you guys and to allow you to understand really the legal framework that is relevant here. We'll go a little bit into that, but the purpose of this manual really is to empower you as people who are potentially thinking of starting clubs to consider how to build your own models. Yes, you might want to come back to Legalese and Marlene and we'll assist you to establish, but really what we found working with a few cannabis club founders in the past is the first thing that people ask is, so can you assist me to build a model? And instead of kind of like incurring those costs and getting someone like us to assist you through that process, we really want people to take ownership over their own business and their own cannabis club model. And this is precisely the reason that we put this model together. It's really an empowerment tool for budding industry players, for startup cannabis clubs to look at the relevant legal framework, to understand the models that we've argued for. There are mainly two of them, which we'll talk about briefly. And then for you to decide which, if any of those, you would like to pursue and how to do so. And once you've done that, really, you come back to us and say, okay, Brett and Marlene, we need some assistance now getting this thing up and running. But it's really an empowerment tool, and that's kind of the purpose behind. That's why we did this in the first place, for the to assist you to set up and manage your own private cannabis club, or PCC as we call it. Yeah, and so in order to, you'll see the first part of this book is quite it's dedicated to understanding the legal framework relevant to private cannabis clubs. It also goes into an overview of the general legal framework applicable to cannabis, the other sectors also, for example, the medicine sector, which Marlene also assists, quality management services in the budding hemp sector, the industrial cannabis sector. But obviously we understand that with private cannabis clubs, we are in the adult use market. And as we'll see now, dealing is still strictly prohibited, even though there are very interesting things happening in Parliament at the moment. And so it's within that realm that we operate, and we set up and set out at length, number one, the legal framework that is relevant to cannabis clubs, and two, the models that we build on an understanding, on quite a cautious understanding of that legal framework. So in a tiny bit of detail, because we do want to field Q&A as much as possible and not overburden you with technicality here. Really what we're looking at is the 2018, the Constitutional Court judgment of 2018. It was actually the 18th of September 2018. So we're actually coming quite a long way since then, almost 4 years, which is actually the only legally binding judicial precedent. So it's the only time a court has said anything about the decriminalized status of the private use of cannabis, right? The word cannabis club in South Africa has never been raised in court as far as a judgment is concerned, other than there's the Hayes Club case, which I'll tell you a bit about. So it's exciting times happening, but it's really the Prince judgment, which decriminalized the personal and private possession, use and cultivation of cannabis for purposes of that adult's private and personal consumption of that cannabis, which was now allowed. Because in the courts, the Constitutional Court specifically said we uphold the prohibition against dealing. So that it was a separate section of the Drugs Act, which the court specifically left intact and untouched, and decided not to hold that prohibition against dealing as unconstitutional. So we're now dealing within a space in which we can privately and personally cultivate, possess, and consume in private, but without dealing. So this manual goes, and the models that you'll see that we set up, they all go as far as possible, and almost all the way. We're quite cautious to trying to ensure that absolutely no transfer of ownership of cannabis takes place. And so I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what the court held in that case, but we can't ignore the fact that the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill, it can't be ignored. It's not law yet. So for those of you who don't really understand the legislative process, a bill is draft legislation. So really it reflects policy in a future law, right? That is officially tabled in Parliament and is discussed in Parliament, and to be enacted once the parliamentary process has taken its course. And so now the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill is in Parliament. It contains a lot of interesting things, because what happened was the courts told Parliament to go and fix the constitutional defects in the Drugs Act, which prohibited people from merely using and possessing in private, and told Parliament to go fix those defects. And this is what we're in, this very interesting process now. I'm sure some of you in attendance know what's going on there. I'd like to hope so. So in this bill, it deals with definitions, the kind of quantities, because it's all small and private quantities, definitions of private, modes of using and possessing and cultivating, and obviously offenses and penalties for going over those prescribed limits. There are interesting developments happening right now. There are revisions to the bill right now. They're contemplating self-medication, palliative care, easing the crimes. But as I say, it is the bill has a predictive quotient, because it kind of predicts how the law is going to look when this bill is passed into an act of Parliament. But right now, it's not law yet. So it's important that you understand, ultimately, again, that the privacy judgment, the Prince privacy judgment, is our binding law. Lastly, just it's important to note that you'll see at the bottom there, it's called the Hayes Club case. So obviously, they quite cleverly called their club THC. The Hayes Club case is going to be massive for the future of the private cannabis club space, because the High Court is specifically adjudicating the lawfulness of that model, of that specific model of cannabis club, that those guys, so Neil Little's the director there, he was charged for dealing on the basis of his cannabis club. And so really they're taking the movement forward in court, incurring costs under a lot of stress for convictions. And so we're really hoping for a positive result for them and for the industry at large there. But we understand that matter is going ahead to be heard in June. It's taken a year and a half for this matter to be set down, but it's only going to happen hopefully in June. It could be delayed more. So simply, yeah, the Drugs Act in the privacy judgment, we know this already, so I'm not going to spend time here. Basically, what the court said was Section 4B of the Drugs Act, which prohibited the use and possession of cannabis, was unconstitutional for that precise reason, for the reason that it invaded our privacy to privately use and possess and cultivate cannabis, basically. Section 5B was also, 5B, which was the prohibition, as I said, against dealing, was not amended. But because the definition of what it means to deal in the Drugs Act included cultivation, they created a carve out, which means to say that they allowed now in the definition of dealing, it does no longer include cultivation for purposes of private and personal consumption. So we know this now, but again, this really is the sum total of the legal framework that we're working with. Of course, there's a lot more detail, but these are the principles that guide us for the establishment of this private cannabis club space, which is really just, in our view, a fundamental exercise of that privacy right that the court granted, just not exercised by and for oneself alone, right? So just to say, so now that we're assuming that we want to exercise the rights that the Prince privacy judgment gave us, but we don't know how, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources, we've got kids at home, we don't want to be around around cannabis plants, whatever legitimate reason you have for not being able to, or not having time to, or not having the resources to grow for yourself, we've built these two models, which we think when a court considers them, or if a court considered them, might say, actually, yes, the right to privacy doesn't mean you can't contract the use of someone. So in this personal and private model, what happens is the member of the public, anyone who doesn't know how or want to cultivate cannabis for their own consumption alone, they very individualistically contract with a cannabis club set up for those purposes, and they are then assisted to exercise their rights. They are still themselves exercising those rights. They are possessing via things such as lease agreements with the club. They are themselves somehow cultivating their own crop through horticultural services agreements. It doesn't necessarily mean that the members are getting their hands dirty with the plant, but there are ways to cultivate that don't mean necessarily being in the field every day. And so what happens is they come together in this personal private model. They are individually contracting the club to assist them to exercise these rights. They are paying for those services. There is no transfer of ownership of cannabis. They either come to the club with their own seeds or seedlings, or the club conversely donates seedlings to them. And so at all times, that plant is tracked and traced to that specific member in whatever grow room. So from a seedling to a veg to a flowering, for example, it's tracked the whole way to prove that there's no dealing. And we're talking small quantities. The club is only producing, the club is actually just delivering the yield from the members' plants to that member. So, and that's relatively, in simple terms, how this personal or private model would work. So it's an individual contracting the services of a private cannabis club individualistically to exercise those rights. That member doesn't necessarily have any relationship with any other member of the club. They're there to exercise their rights alone, right? On the other hand, we've also conceived of a shared or collective model. And unlike the personal or private model, which is founded directly on the wording of the Constitutional Court judgment, that is to say, on the right to privacy in section 14 of the Constitution, this model also levers off our right to freedom of association. So these two rights work alongside indivisibly together to say, well, even though, so we have the right to privately cultivate, possess, use, and consume in private, that doesn't preclude the right to do so in association with others, so collectively. So everything in this case happens, you can see this big circle, within the circle of the club. All cannabis is owned from inception by the members of the club, and the members variously contribute. It might be through funds, it might be through growing, it might be resources and other things. The point is that we are all kind of contributing in a manner not too dissimilar. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the term stokvel, the way that people run their lives a lot, I guess, in lower LSM and rural communities in South Africa. People pool their resources and from inception take out and own as a membership base the product, which is the cannabis, and they were always the owners thereof. So really that's so unlike the personal and private model where individuals are just contracting with the club individualistically, here in this case it is individuals, it's individuals coming together, so they're exercising their right to privacy, but collectively they're doing it together, all within the and it's often done with a social purpose, and it's all within the collective family of the cannabis club. It's a development of what we understand the Prince judgment said to us, because the Prince judgment was based solely on the right to privacy, but at the same time we do believe that there is legal prudence in the sense that a court might, looking at it reasonably, say, well, this is just a natural extension of that. So these are the two models that we've built and can assist members of the public, you guys, to kind of establish. It's important to note, this is just a disclaimer, that we are not we're not with this manual purporting to create legal and industry standards. We are here, as I said, to empower you to consider some recommendations that we make, the legal arguments that we make, the systems, plugins that Marlene will take you through now that we make. It's here to empower you to improve or to assist you to establish. We there are no legal precedents, so we aren't arrogant to the point of saying this is how this whole space is going to pan out. We're here to assist you in your project of building your clubs, and you obviously can take out from what the book for what makes sense to you, all or nothing of it. But the book will assist you to understand whether you want to go into this world and how to improve your systems if you decided to. And then I hope I haven't bored you or spent too much time, but Marlene's going to take over with the management system, which now, so you kind of have a broad overview of the first part of the manual, which is the legal overview, plus these two models that we've built. Now Marlene's got her systems that she plugs into for the establishment and for the actual operations in the field, on the ground, in the club. And that's what Marlene will take you through now.
Awesome, thanks, Brett. Yeah, I think that was a good overview of just the basic understanding before we can even get into the system side. Just understanding that is sort of this is the square within which we can operate, right? And what we're doing with the system now is, as long as you keep it within this square that we've identified, then it's our opinion that you should be okay, and you should have a really solid, legally defendable case if it does get to the worst case scenario where you need to go and defend yourself in court. So yeah, so the system is built really borrowing a lot of aspects from other quality management systems. So I've borrowed a little bit from ISO 9001, which is just a general quality management system. And that's really helped me to identify all the different areas of the club that would need to be managed properly for members to, or for the founders to be able to operate within the square that we've identified now. There's some environmental management in there, so from ISO 14001. There's Global GAP, which is good agricultural practices, and that, along with the GMP stuff, we find really on the legal medicinal side and with the hemp permits. That's pretty involved in that sphere. And then because we're using we're working with people's private and personal information, we've also incorporated some elements from ISO 27000, which is privacy information management. There's risk management, which is ISO 31000, purely because the existence of the club itself is a risk. So you need to be able to identify all of your risks and mitigate them or accept them or reduce them to an acceptable level. And then lastly, we end off with social responsibility, which is just purely a simple thing of, firstly, if you are in a position to make a difference, you should be making that difference. And secondly, helping to just reverse the stigma that's already attached to cannabis consumers due to like 100 years of prohibition. Just trying to show the community that we're better than the lazy couch slouching things that they think we are. So thanks, Brett. Yes, you can carry on for me to the next one. This the first section. So the whole system is divided into 3 sections, and the first section speaks to the personal private model that Brett started off with. So that's the really literal reading of the privacy judgment. It's 2 parties entering into an agreement. So for this module, there's 2 elements within it. It's the club management modules, and that's really figuring out how are you building this thing? What is the legal agreements and your structure, the entity that you're going to operate within. Those are the things that are addressed within the first section. So obviously, for any business or for any, it doesn't matter if you're a PTY, you'll need to have a memorandum of incorporation. If you are a non-profit entity, then you'll need to have a constitution, and that document just basically sets out exactly how you plan to operate and the details of your activities and your objectives with establishing this entity. So because this is an individualistic relationship, and the fact that from a theoretical perspective, the club would be purely providing cultivation services, that is an outsourced thing that they're providing, you can have this cultivation operation service established as a PTY or a for-profit company. However, with that being said, note that there will still be significant risk attached to that, and you may be attracting attention that you don't want, even though we will have this theoretical framework that say, listen, I think that what I'm doing is in line with the law. The process of getting to that state where you get to state your case, that's quite a process. So just being aware of that specific technicality. And then a demand and supply planning process. It's very obvious that you would need to do some planning with regards to your cultivation. You can't open up 1,000 memberships, but you only have space to grow 300 plants, because it will be this plant belongs to this member. So you'd need to have your planning set out from the start so that you know what is your capacity, how many members can you accommodate, how many plants can you grow, and what are the inputs that you would then need to be able to get that cultivation operation going. Um, we also have some few guidelines for you on the finances, things that you need to keep in mind and plan for. And then it comes to the subscriber management, or subscriber would be for your for-profit, or a member would be then your non-profit company member that's joining as a member. So we just lay out that membership experience for you, things that you would need to plan for and keep in mind, legal agreements that you would need to draft. So those would specifically be member agreements or subscriber agreements, a lease agreement, a horticultural services agreement. And that's really where Brett comes in to help you bog those things down properly from the beginning, because those will be your main arguments to defend that what you're doing can be viewed as legal and that you're not busy trying to break any laws. There are some guidelines that we set out with regards to members participating and their actual contribution to the services that are being provided. Some guidelines about withdrawal of cannabis. Obviously, you need to keep some serious records of what goes to who, and to prove that what is going to this specific member is what already belongs to them. So they are simply getting their property back that has been in the club's ecosphere while it was growing. And then for any sort of institution, it's always nice to have a satisfaction process to gauge, like, how good are you at doing what you say you are doing? Are your members satisfied with the service that you're providing? What problems are they possibly experiencing from their side? And then using that as an input to facilitate improvement with the club. The second section, section B, speaks then to sort of the same types of processes within the shared collective model. So that's now the one where we say we're still doing everything privately, but we're doing it together, because just the pure fact that we're doing it together doesn't mean it's wrong if we're still doing it within the constraints of a private operation. So again, the constitution is obviously very critical in establishing your entity. And here, because this is a shared association where people are physically coming together and doing this thing together, like a stokvel, as Brett rightly referenced, you would have to establish this model in a non-profit organization, which is with the Department of Social Development, or then a non-profit company, which you can register with the CIPC. Again, you'd need to have a demand and supply planning process ready, because now this may get a little bit more complicated, because this is not that individualistic relationship. However, this model does not require that very intense tracking and tracing that the personal private model requires, because everything belongs to everyone. So I don't have to prove that this plant belongs to member X. The pure fact that it's there and that this person is a member means that it's already part of their property that they own. So you can make it as simple as saying, in the constitution, that for every member we will cultivate 2 plants. So then you know that if I have a space where I can have 600 plants, then it means I can't have more than 300 members, because I can't grow for more than 300 members, unless I then bring my quantity down to say I'm growing for 1 member, 1 plant, and then you can have 600 members. So that's a really simple and much easier way to determine this demand and supply process. again, some advice that we give you relating to finances, just understanding that you're starting off with something new. If you do have investors, they might not be able to get their money back right from the start. It might take you a little bit to get to a place where you're able to repay loans, or give investors their money back. But just some things that you need to plan for, salaries, etc. Yeah, really important guidelines to consider when you're starting any type of business. And then here, the subscriber or the member management, again, a lacquer layout of your membership experience, which will be a little bit different than the personal private model, because here we coming together. So that interaction already now, members are mixing with other members. We may have a social setting where we get members to come and safely and privately consume their cannabis that the club has cultivated for them. Um, and the legal agreements, again, is what will bind this relationship. Although, again, now we don't need to necessarily have things like lease agreements and service agreements in place. Those elements can all be addressed within the membership experience, or the membership agreement that is set out from the start. Um, Again, some guidelines about participation and contribution. Here, the aim would be, because we're trying to do something that has more of a social, and often a public aim. We want to try and create this space for the member to come and see their own plant if they want to, or if we want to allow them that access to come and see their own plant. And maybe once on a Saturday for 3 hours, once a month, they want to come and spend some time with their plant, learn a little bit about, oh, we're having a powdery mildew problem. Let's educate you a little bit about how we tackle a problem like that. Come and help us and spray your plant, and, just get them involved, and get more to an educational, cohesive, collective experience. Um, so regardless now of the fact that all the cannabis belongs to all of the members, I still need to keep record of the withdrawal of all that cannabis, because I need to prove that no cannabis has come from outside of the club's ecosphere into the club, and no cannabis has gone from inside the club outside the club. So all of the cannabis that is within the club must be dispensed and dispersed to members within the club. So your record keeping in that sense is really important, to say that, listen here, this is what I've done. We haven't been dealing with anyone. These are people that are contributing to us being able to have this operation and the space for them to cultivate plants for them. And they are simply coming to get their own cannabis back at the end of the day. And because this is a social experience, you are trying to incorporate a lot of different elements into this experience. A member satisfaction process is, again, highly recommended to make sure that you're actually fulfilling the aims of what it is that you're trying to set out to do with this association. And then in section C, thank you, Brett, it's the general management module. So these modules could really speak to any of the two models that you choose, that you may choose of to incorporate into your club. So regardless of what model you choose, you're going to need some guidelines on cultivation. So when I say guidelines on cultivation, I don't mean I'm going to teach you how to grow your plants. I assume that, and hope that you already know how to do that, or have someone who knows how to do that. But where my role comes in support is to help you create the documentation to record all of your activities, and to set out a really good procedure of how this process is run. Um, and then that record keeping is part of this like a file that we're building, up for you to be your proof. So like 5 years ago, if you were dealing in cannabis, you recording any sort of transaction or any records of your grow, your cultivation operation, that was the proof that could get you into trouble. And now within the club construct, that is the proof that could get you out of trouble. That is where you are now showing that, look here, this is my argument. You just need to hear this now and see my proof, that I'm not busy dealing. I'm cultivating for this specific set of members. I'm cultivating with this specific set of procedures. Here's all my proof. Here's everything I've done in the operation. This plant didn't make it to the end because here you can see on the list we needed to cull it because it was infested with spider mites or whatever the case may be. Um, So just really in your cultivation operation, getting a really good planning overview. If you do have the personal private module, you need to look at the tracking and tracing, which is a very admin intensive requirement that you have to stick to. And yeah, just prove through this very accurate record keeping that you're not busy dealing, you're busy cultivating for your members. The environmental management module just speaks to being a responsible cultivator within your environment. So, um, checking what is the current environmental setting that you're planning to operate in. What sort of impact is your cultivation operation going to have on the environment that you're surrounding yourself with? And is there any responsibility that you should take for implementing improvement in your environment? Is that within the possibility of your club's operation, to actually give back to the environment and create a healthy space that you grow your plants in? And then for your club, you will obviously have employees. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have a non-profit company or a non-profit organization. There are still jobs and tasks that need to be completed. And those people that complete those tasks can be employed. They can have a legitimate employment within the club, which is why we're so adamant that this model can really provide a good economic difference to South Africa, because now we can start taking the guy that used to go and grow in his little backyard, maybe in if he lives in a rural community or in an informal settlement. um, we can give him good genetics to go and grow in his little garden, and he comes and submits that to the club at the end of the day. We pay him a salary for cultivating for the club. um, and he's got a really stable income and a prospect to be able to live properly, and contribute back to the economy. So to facilitate those employees, you need to obviously have some processes in place. There's general employment contracts that you need to sign, which is again a legal thing that legalese could help you out with. And my side is really on helping you identify proper people that you can bring into your club, identify what it is that you want out of an employee, and then just set some basic processes in place for you, regards to leave, disciplinary procedures, because we always need to plan for the worst, unfortunately. um, and then also just developing and evaluating your staff and making sure that you're also busy building them up, because if you take care of your staff, they're going to take care of your club. That's how it works in business in general. The information management module is quite an important one, because remember, now you're going to be working with some quite some sensitive information of individuals. Some people might not want their workplace to find out that they are a cannabis consumer. It might get them into trouble. So then you want to really get to a point where you are protecting the information adequately and ensuring that no one has access to this information that should not have access to this information. And then just general compliance things like having a privacy policy and a promotion to access of information policy in place for this information that you're busy dealing with. Then, like I quickly explained to you, the risk management is really important, and that is something we do at the very beginning with you. After you've now worked through the manual and you've decided what model you want to employ, we sit with you and help you identify what the risks are that are associated with this venture of yours, and how do we either mitigate or reduce them, or then we have to accept that risk. For example, transport is still a really big problem. That's still within the definition of transshipment, which is within the definition of dealing in the Drugs Act. So that is a risk that you would need to be aware of if you want to be delivering cannabis to your members, for example. And then lastly, if it does happen that within your nonprofit structure you make a profit, because that can happen, you have one of two options for what you want to do with this profit of yours. You can either reinvest that back into your club to further develop the objectives that you've identified in your constitution, or you can then donate that money to a charitable cause of your choice. And this also extends, it goes sort of beyond the profit. It doesn't only need to be a profit that you donate. You may have skills or time within your membership base, and maybe maybe on a Saturday morning, once every 2 months, we go to a children's house nearby and we go and paint out a room for them, or we fix their roof, or we fix their garden. Or we go together as a membership base to a soup kitchen with our little club t-shirts to show everyone that, hey, look, we're not the bad guys that you think we are. We actually do contribute back to the community. We're intelligent people, we are business people, and we have something to give back despite the fact that we love smoking weed also. Um, so yeah, that really makes up the whole collective of the private cannabis club management system. And like I said, this is really important in terms of gathering the proof if you do get to a stage where you need to go and defend yourself in a court of law. Also, additionally, this process or this system will help you for when the recreational commercial sector does come online and you want to switch over to a PTY and have a legitimate, like, I'm selling weed because now the law is allowing it, then having all of these processes in place will really help you with that switch over to just make it a lot simpler and a lot easier for you to do if you're into that long-term vision. So yeah, I think it's time for me to hand over back. Oh no, I'm still carrying on to how to use the manual. I don't know, Brett, maybe we can speak on that together. But it's a pretty simple process, and the manual was written in a simple format and layout specifically for that purpose. The first step, I think, very obviously, is read it. That's it's important to see what we have to say, and then the second step, using the information within the model within the manual to identify the model that you want to use. Are you going to just do the service level agreement based thing of the personal private model, or do you want to make this association and the shared collective model? The third step would be depending on the model that you are trying to or planning to use, you would need to form your actual establishment. So either a PTY if you want to go the for-profit route, or then a non-profit company or organization. And then the first next important step is planning your supply and demand, because essentially this is all going to be about weed, and that weed needs to come from somewhere. So if we need to plan, where's that cannabis going to come from? Is the club going to cultivate it? Are we going to have grower members? And how do we put all of that together? And then you use the private cannabis club management system and its modules to help you plan your operations and activities, so that by the time you're ready to kick off, all your systems are in place, you know exactly what to do, your employees have been trained, and you have a clear sign-up process for your members to join the club. Brett, do you want to add anything else on the steps to follow?
I think, thanks, Em. That was great. I think that, yeah, I mean, as we said from the top, I mean, this is just really a mechanism to try and assist people to enter the space, taking cognizance of the legal frameworks and the models that we think make sense and might hold legal muster in front of a court of law. And I think, you know, Marlene's laid it out properly. I mean, it's always, for the time being, going to be a risky business. We are dealing with cannabis. Cops are raiding cannabis clubs. You know, these are risks that you are taking. And that's precisely why we actually came together and made this manual. You go through these steps. You might want to come to us. They're also, you know, so Marlene and I work specifically within the setup and management of the club from a cannabis perspective. But of course, we lean heavily on legalese when it comes to potentially, you know, privacy policies, employment relationships, and other things. You know, as you guys know, legalese is a one-stop shop. So we could, you know, tax implications, because these do drive tax implications. And so it's a great kind of partnership that we work alongside. Really, this is a legalese project itself to kind of cover you on all bases to the extent possible, bearing in mind the fact that this is risky business, as you guys must understand already, given that until, as Marlene says, the prohibition is done away with and we have a licensable market, we are working within this this interesting kind of legal gray zone. And we hope that the Hayes Club case, that the guys there are successful and give us some solid, very you know, foundational legal precedent, but we still wait and see. I think with that said, I mean, here's a link where you can get the manual. I think we also posted it in the chat box because you obviously won't be able to click on that. So if you're interested in having a look at the manual and maybe purchasing it, you know, the link is in the chat. And I think with the time that we have spare, we'd love to field some questions. If anyone's interested, just let me know. Either raise your hand, or do I know how to unmute everyone, or just, you know, has anyone got a question? We'd love to field to the extent that anyone has questions. So Philippa, yeah, just you could drop your questions in the chat box. So Philippa, thanks for your question. How do you get around maximum number of plants on property? So I'm assuming by that, Philippa, what you mean is how do you expand your, I'm just going to actually allow you to talk, because if I get your question wrong, it's going to be a waste. So yeah, I mean, Philippa, if I've got you, you're talking about really kind of expanding once your space that you have is kind of exhausted with plants. How do you expand beyond that? If that is your question, it's a tricky one. I mean, we always advise clients to start small and see how it goes, get a membership base. If you're working within a personal and private model, then, you know, you will be limited with your grow. You will be limited with your grow if it's on site, irrespective of which model you go with. But then the question becomes whether you can contract third party or satellite growers, friends and other people who you know are growing quality bud elsewhere, who might feed into your club. Now, in my opinion, as long as that space is being leased out to the club, so the club has a legitimate legal use for that club, and you can show how the member is themselves actually contracting for the use of that space, or the club in the case of a shared collective model. So basically, as long as you're showing that the use of the space is by the club itself, you're not entering into, in my view, very tricky agreements between three parties, bringing them together in ways that I personally haven't got my head around to understanding, then it's conceivable that you can expand your operation. But to start, we would say, you know, find a space where you can house your grow with the ability to grow into it. And have the right kind of plant quotas per member, or the right, really the key to this, and Marlene would jump on this point, is that you have to really plan your supply and demand process very meticulously. I think, you know, when you set your thing up, you must have a maximum number of members to start off with. And then, like, if you're growing beyond that space, you either have to cut down on your production and members, or keep it to that maximum number of members, or start considering expanding, as I've mentioned before. But it is tricky. I don't know if that responds to your question, or if Marlene has anything.
I don't know if am I still on mute, or can you hear me?
No, we can hear you.
Yeah. Is there not in the legislation a maximum number of plants, like eight plants, so you can have? I'm trying to remember if it's 2 per person or per adult and 8 per private property.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
That's what I'm trying to get my head around. How if there is, because I'm actually a non-profit lawyer, so I have had clients coming to me with questions about setups and on private property, because clearly if this is going to be for a private venture, you can't be doing it in public, so it has to be on private property. So we're kind of in a catch-22 there. Well,
so the catch-22, I don't know if it's a catch-22 per se. I think you raise a very good point, just on the prescription of numbers of plants per member, right? So those are numbers and quantities given in terms of the bill, which is draft legislation, right? So firstly, it's important to note that those numbers have no legal, it's not law yet. They're also considering in the parliamentary process of easing those, so increasing those numbers. But even assuming, right, so for right now, we're dealing with the Prince judgment, which is small quantities for purposes of private use. Now, if we can prove the privacy of that possession through a lease agreement, we can prove the cultivation by the member or collectively via the shared collective model, right? Then it is private. Membership is very much a private thing. You've got to be referred to by an existing member. So those processes we haven't gone into in this chat at all, but those are to ensure the privacy of this collective as a club, or whether it's a personal or private model. The point is that if you are, notwithstanding the fact that these quantities given in the bill are draft, assuming that the wording of the bill was law for the time being, you would still be able to, so 4 plants per member, flowering plants per member at any given time, flowering on behalf of a member is really, it's a lot of cannabis, assuming that it's flowering plants, so that the member can draw from. If it's a personal and private model, the member is just getting delivered, or they are fetching their own yield as if they were growing it at home. It's the first jump beyond growing it at home, really. And the space is private. If it's a shared and collective kind of model, then you still, if you're keeping to 1 plant, for example, flowering plant grown per member at any one given time, then that member is, their personal needs, unless they have really, really excessive needs, would be taken care of, and it would be in terms of a lease agreement, always. So the privacy of that land is always ensured. I don't know if Marlene, you have anything to add? Just to say, because Wandile makes the mention that it's a maximum of 2 plants per adult at a private residence. Again, these are not numbers that are in the law, and that two plants per adult is incorrect even on the current wording of the bill. It's 4 plants, 4 flowering plants, which the bill defines as the equivalent of 2 immature plants. So you can have 4 flowering plants or 8 immature, so non-flowering plants, if you're a person living alone, right? Or 8, so it doubles it, 8 flowering plants or 16 immature plants if you're not living alone. And then it just says for people occupying a space in private. So now it doesn't have to be your home. Even on the wording of the bill, my reading is that it doesn't mean your home. It doesn't have to mean your home. The Constitutional Court made it very clear that consumption in private doesn't have to be a home. Many people don't have a home. Many people don't consume at home. They might have kids at home. So even assuming the bill was passed, which it hasn't been, we think that on this ground specifically, that wouldn't really be an issue. I don't know if that makes sense. We've got 3. I don't know if that helps. Okay, thanks, Philippa. Thanks for the question. Be interesting to chat beyond this as an expert in non-profit organizations. Maybe we'll have a chat and talk about that. That would be really cool, actually. We've got 3 minutes until 1 o'clock lunchtime. So if anyone we've got 3 minutes to chat, but if not, it's been really wonderful speaking with you guys. Have a look at take a look at the link that we've dropped to the manual. Understand, please, that it's a tool designed to assist you to build your own business, not incur the costs of consulting us, which would be way more expensive than the price of the book itself, just from a value perspective. And then get in touch with Legalese, with us, and let's start your journey. I don't know, Em, if you have any closing words.
No, I think you summed it up pretty good, as you usually do. Thank you so much. I just wanted to also say thank you to everyone just for being here. It's nice to be able to have these conversations with people who are really interested and really want this information. Sorry, I just see Garth said please send a link for the manual. It's earlier up in the chat. There is a link there, Garth. Actually, if you go up all the way, the first message in the chat is also a link. Okay, there, Brett sent it again for us, so it's there. But yeah, guys, just want to say thank you so much for being here and for listening to us. And I'm really hoping I'll find some of you across the industry somewhere busy setting up your own thing and finding your space within the industry. It's our time now, so let's plant all the plants and shine and start this thing. Thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated.
Thanks a lot, guys.